In the heart of the Wild West, Tommy embarked on a road less traveled, unaware of the labyrinth that awaited him. His journey, fueled by the anticipation of reuniting with his family, started off as any other. The open road, the vast landscapes, and the rhythmic hum of his car engine were familiar companions. But the path he had chosen this time was different, unexplored, unknown. Tommy, a man of routine and predictability, was not one to venture off the beaten path. But this time, the allure of a shortcut, a quicker way to his family, had enticed him. You see, Tommy was no stranger to the western roads, but this detour, this deviation from his usual route, was a first. As the day wore on, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of twilight. Tommy's anticipation gradually turned into unease. The road seemed endless, the landmarks unrecognizable. It was then that he realized his folly. He had taken a wrong turn. A sense of dread began to creep in as he found himself driving past the same driveway again and again. A driveway that led to a cabin, an old, seemingly abandoned cabin standing solitary amidst the wilderness. Its eerie silence and the uncanny familiarity of the driveway sent chills down his spine. Yet no matter which way he turned, the road always led him back to the same haunting driveway. With nightfall, his hopes of reaching his family that day dwindled. His only option was to spend the night in his car, parked by the side of the unfamiliar road, under the watchful eyes of the moon and stars. As he settled into the discomfort of his makeshift bed, his eyes never left the cabin. It stood there silent and menacing, its darkened windows reflecting the bleak moonlight. Unbeknownst to him, the night had its own plans as the cabin silently loomed in the background. As dawn broke, Tommy awoke not to the familiar confines of his car, but to the unsettling interior of the mysterious cabin. His heart pounded in his chest like a wild drum, echoing the rhythm of his mounting fear. Tommy blinked, hoping to dispel the surreal vision before him, but the rustic walls of the cabin remained, indifferent to his disbelief. This was not the result of a dream, but a jarring reality that sent cold shivers down his spine. The air was stale, heavy with an unspoken history, and the silence was broken only by the distant creaking of the cabin, as if it breathed with a life of its own. In the half-light of the early morning, Tommy began to explore his unexpected surroundings. His footsteps echoed hollowly on the wooden floor, each step an intrusion into the cabin's solitude. He found an abandoned kitchen, its dishes coated in a thick layer of dust, a silent testament to meals shared long ago. An eerie sense of habitation hung in the air, suggesting that the cabin was not as deserted as it seemed. In one corner, a cracked mirror caught his eye. It reflected a face, his face, but twisted and distorted in the fractured glass. It was a chilling reminder of his isolation, a stark contrast to his destination filled with warmth and family. Desperate, Tommy tried the doors, only to find them unnaturally heavy, refusing to yield. The windows, too, were uncooperative, their panes as impenetrable as stone. It was as if the cabin had swallowed him whole, trapping him within its timbered belly. His heart pounded louder, his breaths coming in short gasps. The cabin seemed to tighten around him, its walls closing in. But there was no escape. The cabin was a puzzle, a labyrinth, and he was the unwilling player in its game. Frantic but determined, Tommy resolved to uncover the cabin's secrets. He knew he had to get out, to escape this wooden prison and continue his journey, but how? The cabin, it seemed, had claimed him, its secrets lying in wait. As time stretched thin, Tommy could feel an unseen presence, the cabin's heartbeat syncing with his own. A sense of unease crept into his bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. The cabin, with its creaking timbers and whispering wind, seemed to pulse with life, a life that was not welcoming. Tommy, a practical man by nature, found himself tiptoeing around as if trying not to disturb a sleeping bear. Objects seemed to shift when he wasn't looking. A cup here, a chair there, as if the cabin was playing a cruel game with him. The air was thick with attention that he couldn't quite place, like a word on the tip of his tongue. And then, there were the sounds. Soft, almost imperceptible, they would creep into his consciousness and set his heart racing. A rustle here, a knock there, echoing in the stillness, breaking the silence like a stone shattering a glass window. Rationality told him it was just the cabin settling, but a primal fear whispered otherwise. In his desperation, Tommy tried to communicate with the entity he felt around him. He would call out into the silence, his voice swallowed by the echoing walls. He would ask it what it wanted, plead with it to let him go. Yet, his words were met only with the same eerie quiet. leaving him feeling more alone than ever. He found himself dreading the night, the darkness that seemed to amplify his fear. Shadows danced on the walls, morphing into grotesque shapes that filled his mind with terrifying possibilities. Each creak, each whisper of the wind seemed to carry a warning, a promise of things to come. Every ticking second, every shadowed corner only deepened the mystery, pulling Tommy further into the cabin's enigmatic embrace. In the heart of fear, clarity often finds its way. Tommy, trapped in the enigma, started to piece together the cabin's cryptic puzzle. As the sun pierced through the decrepit window, Tommy ventured deeper into the cabin. The dust-laden air whispered tales of the past, while faded newspaper clippings and aged photographs lay scattered across the floor. They whispered of a time when the cabin was a home, a sanctuary filled with laughter and love. But the undercurrent of sorrow was hard to ignore. It painted a picture of a family torn apart by an unspeakable tragedy, leaving behind an entity trapped in an endless loop of despair and longing. Tommy found a journal, its leather-bound cover worn by time. The entries were a chronicle of a man named Harold, the cabin's former resident. Harold was a miner, a loving father, a husband, whose life was marred by a devastating accident in the mines. The entries grew darker, more frantic, hinting at a presence he could not understand nor escape. Harold's last entry was a plea for help, a desperate cry that echoed through decades. Tommy's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the truth. The entity was not malevolent, but trapped, a reflection of Harold's despair. The cabin, with its eerie echoes and inexplicable phenomena, was a manifestation of Harold's plea for liberation. The constant reappearances of the cabin in Tommy's path, the inexplicably waking up inside it. These were not acts of aggression, but cries for attention, for help. The puzzle pieces fell into place. The entity was not leading him astray, but guiding him, seeking his aid to break the cycle of torment. Tommy's fear was replaced with a sense of purpose, a determination to help this lost soul. He knew what he had to do. The cabin was not a prison, but a plea for liberation, a cry muffled by time. Armed with understanding, Tommy found the courage to confront the cabin's spectral occupant. In the heart of the cabin, Tommy stood, his voice echoing through the haunting silence. He spoke to the entity, his words imbued with a newfound sense of empathy. He spoke of his journey, of the wrong turns and the unexpected detours, and how they led him to this cabin, to the entity's eternal solitude. Tommy made a promise to the entity, to the spirit, that he would help it find peace, that he would help it break free from the chains of its past, that had kept it shackled to the cabin, that had kept it lost in its own world. He would help it reconcile with its past, make peace with its regrets, and find its way to the other side. As his words filled the cabin, a change began to take place. A sense of tranquility started seeping into the cabin, replacing the ominous aura that had once filled it. The entity, the spirit, seemed to understand. It seemed to accept Tommy's promise. It seemed to trust him, and with that trust, the spirit began to free itself. It began to let go of its past, of its regrets. It began to move on, to find peace. And as it did, the cabin seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The chill in the air softened, the eerie silence gave way to the gentle rustle of the wind, and the cabin's haunting presence started to fade away. With the entity's departure, Tommy found his escape. The cabin, no longer a labyrinth of lost paths, began to make sense. The roads, no longer an endless loop, led him away from the cabin. As he got into his car and drove away, he looked back one last time. The cabin, once a symbol of his fears and doubts, now stood as a testament to his courage and understanding. As Tommy drove away, the cabin faded into the horizon, its mystery solved, its spirit free, leaving only a tale of a journey that ventured beyond the known.